Perfect. Welcome back to Beyond the Org, the podcast where we take you behind the scenes of how real enterprise projects come to life. I am your co-host, joined by Eric Dreschfield, and we will be diving deep into people, process, and technology today, driving empathy with architecture, and having a really good conversation with our speaker today. Before jumping in, though, I would like to do a quick shout out to our sponsor, Cluebot, for making this series possible. Cluebot is working to redefine how teams design, analyze, and deliver Salesforce solutions leveraging AI-driven insights. So we're excited to have their support as we bring these conversations to life. So jumping right in, Eric, would love for you to introduce our speaker today.
Absolutely. So joining us today is a guest who sits at the fascinating intersection of human behavior, data, and enterprise architecture. Daniel Gorton is a holistic architect, a mission-driven strategist, and a dedicated advocate for the human heartbeat of technology. Navigating the Salesforce ecosystem since 2016, Daniel brings a powerful blend of over 20 years experience across the nonprofit and corporate sectors. With an academic foundation in psychology and social work, he is proficient at bridging the gap between complex technical systems and the real people who rely on them. Daniel is a multi-certified architect and frequent speaker at global events such as Dreamforce and Midwest Dreamin'. He is the founder of DHG Holistic Solutions, where he anchors every project on 3 pillars: data, humans, and goals. Whether he's serving the planning committee for Dreamin' Data or champion authentic community stories through the Rise with Voice movement, Daniel is on a mission to ensure that technology gives us more time for what matters, making a difference with our unique gifts and fostering meaningful human interaction. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. That was a very generous introduction. Thank you all for having me. And Eric, thank you for being such a wonderful connector in the community.
All right. Well, let's get started. I think the first kind of question that we want to explore with you is a little bit of your journey from the education you have in psychology and social work to where you are today. Can you kind of talk us through what your path looked like?
Yeah, I love it. I started in corporate for about 10 years, working on various technology and data projects. And I always loved having that entrepreneurial spirit of listening out for the real needs that people have and to help them be successful. And following that, found my way into the Salesforce ecosystem. It's almost about 10 years now. But throughout it all, I just love this intersection of people, data, tech, and missions, and to help people thrive. For me, the social work and psychology education was really an interest in how do people work? What needs do they have? How can we be more inclusive and intentional and, include a diverse group of feedback and people so that we can make sure that the systems we're designing will actually be useful and used, and I do believe joyful.
So part of what you experienced along your journey was working, on the nonprofit side of things. I think from our earlier conversations, you made some comments about resources. I think your wording was maybe being thin, and it was tough to make an impact. So how did you attack some of that?
Yeah, the nonprofit sector I've been involved with in various roles for over 20 years, and they're doing such an incredible impact through their missions for people and communities and various causes. With that, though, can come more limited resources, whether that's people or funding or time. There's a lot being asked of nonprofits. And so I think the key there is really meeting people where they're at and understanding, okay, what is, the next goals or missions of the nonprofit and the people, and how do we ground that also to their end clients and participants and make sure that, we're creating a forward that is realistic, and understands those constraints that they have, but also looks out for those opportunities that, hey, if we do have greater efficiencies, then it does free up people's time, right? To focus more on, the people that they are serving and to bring their passion. So I think it's really about understanding, the situations and then working collaboratively with people on how to take what might feel like Mount Everest down to these smaller micro steps.
Interesting approach. It sounds to me like your focus wasn't just the process of what needs to get done and the business side of things, but you were looking more on the human side of things, bringing in your education, your social work background, your psychology background, on the surface to me seems contradictory. I don't think of psychology and social work as being technology related, but I think you just explained, to me at least, why it makes sense that they are related and why technology should be built around the human. Can you dive into that maybe a little deeper and talk about the importance of keeping, for lack of a better word, keeping the human in the loop?
I love that. I love the human in the loop concept and how we can do that. Technology can do amazing things. And there are people who have needs or goals, talents, and abilities of what they're trying to do with their missions. And so there can be that bridge between the two, and there can be silos. And so I've always wanted to figure out how can I take technical concepts and solutions and always relate them back to the business need, but also specifically what's in it for each person. Often people haven't reported to me. And so there, it's through the working relationships and the empathy that we together are defining that pathway forward. For example, as a Salesforce architect, I don't have all the answers. I really do appreciate and need to understand what the business and people want, because I might have a few different technologically sound solutions, but it might be more important to choose solution B because it really fits the needs of the people and where they're at. And so I think those are just some of the ways that you're right. It can sort of seem like they don't go well together, but I think that can actually be sometimes why technology isn't successful if it's just purely a technological effort or a lift and shift, for example.
Daniel, I have to ask, I mean, just hearing what you said right now and just from the intro that Eric mentioned earlier, the term, I think what that was mentioned was holistic architect, and just being able to look at things from multi angles, just for our audience. And our audience, would be folks that are in various spots in their career, could be architects, could be analysts, developers, and so on. So what are some of the actionable things or areas for an individual to start to think like a holistic architect as they're trying to either level up their own career or try to just do a better outcomes for themselves, for their customers, for the organizations they work for?
Yeah, and I'd like to, follow some of my mentors in the community who really are breaking down the concept of an architect to where it really, for example, is a mindset. It's thinking about the future, not just the current need, but it's also thinking about all the systems involved. And I think that's another reason why I enjoyed social work, because it was about the systems around people. And so, for example, that could be what other systems are there, in the landscape. What else is happening within this organization for change right now at the same time? What are those various pieces of data that we have, and how do we help them work better together? And then driving the strategy of, okay, we have a system, that's very capable of doing a lot. We have our business needs, and then how do we get the most out of this system, keep it performant and at scale? And so that's what I mean by the holistic. It's looking at all the various pieces. And I think architects, as soon as you have that mindset, you are on that path as an architect. And from there, you're building, technical and people and business skills to bring it all together.
That's interesting. And it seems to me as though there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of possibilities, a lot of things that could potentially cause friction, maybe that could potentially derail the progress, perhaps. How do you handle that? What do you feel is the best way to prevent things from being over engineered? Maybe is the word I'm looking for here right now.
You're 100% right. There's so many variables, so many ideas, so many solutions we could choose, but yet there's also a certain amount of time and resources and money and need, to solve challenges. And so for there, I really think that we are looking at the possibilities. Sometimes it might just be obvious that there's a constraint that a particular solution or path just maybe wouldn't work out. But I think the other thing I always appreciate is how do we get the feedback earlier in the process? Not at, for example, the user acceptance testing. I'm an advocate for as we're to, back to business analysis, really understanding and asking questions to be clear on what the need is one opportunity, for example. Another is as we begin to build, maybe we don't take it all the way to completion. We, do a mock-up or start, the process and bring it back to the user and the teams along the way. Now, I understand, though, that can take more time. I do believe, though, that effort to get the feedback early and throughout, rather than, let's say, once it's ready to go in the system, that includes training, too. That could be opportunities along the way for people to learn the system. I think the earlier that happens, the earlier we can pivot as needed, if something just isn't going to work out, and just make sure that what we are choosing is going to be useful.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times, Daniel, and just from my own anecdotal experience, and I've heard this from others as well, sometimes it's easy to get down the rabbit hole of just solutioning and just, building automations and trying to build this fancy system. But oftentimes the why, and just kind of leaning on the name of this episode, right? The empathy architecture that is actually, this is for the people that are going to be using the tool and understanding kind of the value drivers, what's in it for them. How do we ensure success from an adoption perspective? And also in the name of the podcast, right? Beyond the Org, because the technology is just one piece of it. And it seems like in the conversation, that's pretty apparent that just building an architecture in a vacuum will not yield to success typically, but we'd love to get your opinion on that.
Yeah, and all these skill sets that people bring, I think that's also part of the point is, people who are very technically minded are definitely needed, and people who understand the business are needed. And then there's a whole spectrum in between. I mean, there's some people who don't enjoy technology, and that's okay. Or there's some people who are the super users. And so I really do try to figure out, how do we leverage those different skill sets? But I think you're right. I think if tech is only sort of developed without the connection to the people, I think we've all been customers probably on the other side of that, where we can just sort of feel that it doesn't have that heartbeat, right? It's sort of mechanical or maybe cold. And I'm not saying, that there aren't times when maybe that really is up to what the people need. But I think any opportunity, to give people in the loop and helping to design that and make sure that, we are taking, good use of the resources for those that are very technically minded too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and especially now with the emergence of AI, and AI has been around for a while, but obviously with Gen AI being at the spotlight of things, and the continuous questions of is AI going to replace jobs? Is AI going to make things harder for people to get things done, and just adding more unclarity, I guess, in how things will operate. I see this as potentially a good thing and a bad thing, right? Because going back to automation, if we're going to leverage AI for the purposes of kind of what Kluba does, right? Being able to do requirement gathering and documentation for various project activities, well, that is great to an extent, but the underlying knowledge, the underlying understanding of the technology needs to be there from an architecture perspective, the consultative nature to clients or the business stakeholders. Curious to get your perspective around what you're seeing in your domain around how AI is starting to play a role in the type of work you're doing with your clients, and what are your clients asking for, and just generally speaking, any best practices that you've come up or seen as you're, kind of doing your own thing with your business.
It's a really interesting question. I know this is on a lot of people's minds, and there's a lot of spectrum in this of how we all feel about it, and where we're at in the learning journey and our experiences, again, on the customer side of where we see AI more and more, whether we call in somewhere and a computer introduces itself, or it's the chat system, or whatever. But I do believe, like any technology, there is a place for AI. And I think, again, if we ground it in what the end customers are looking for and provide them the option that if they, if that's a path that they want for success, that we offer that, but then also still, appeal to people who are, or they do want to talk to a human, right? Don't add the friction to where that's not possible. I mean, I had one telephone system that just flat out hung up, when asked to speak, with the human. So that wasn't such a great experience. But there's definitely the potential here for, there are always in everyone's roles, I believe, the tasks that are just maybe boring or tedious or mundane. I think starting small with a few of those, like don't try to solve everything with AI, but pick some that are just really eating a lot of time and energy and that do make sense to automate because it's just a repetitive series of steps that you can easily teach a computer. And then the hope there then is that that same person who's bringing these other gifts, maybe they're a fundraiser, they're running programs, or they're in sales or marketing, they have all that expertise and passion that they want to be bringing to their role. And so if AI can offlift some of the more mundane pieces, then the hope is that they can focus more time on what they truly love to do, and then also for more meaningful human interactions. So for example, maybe a customer does want to, work with the AI, system, but then there might be other customers who need, the more personalized human interaction. So I think there's a place for both. It's not binary here. I think there's a spectrum, but start small, be clear on what it is we're trying to achieve. Don't just put the tech ahead of the problem. Although I will say, yes, sometimes it is nice to explore what a technology can do. And then that infuses in ideas of like, oh, I've been struggling with this. I didn't know that technology or AI could do that for me. So it is a little bit of exploring it from both sides. But I think, again, if we can keep the human experience in the loop, we can make sure we don't deploy something that is going to frustrate people in the long run. And I also finally understand, that people are looking for efficiencies, but I also know there's a lot of people and organizations that already have way too much on their plates. And so I think if AI can come in, I don't necessarily see, a reduction in staff. I'm thinking, how do we work with that existing group now that they're freed up to do the more interesting projects and assignments and human outreach?
So I'm starting to really understand how your background plays into this now because the conversation that you just went through, in my mind, I'm sitting there thinking the focus that you're showing right there was really more on how does the human feel about their job? What is it they're doing? How are they feeling about what they're doing? How do they feel at the end of the week when they go home at 5 o'clock on a Friday after accomplishing the tasks they've accomplished? And so I feel like the way you just described it, that viewpoint is almost part of your job as the compassionate architect, perhaps. That is, am I making sense there?
You are making sense. And I know feelings could be that soft area, but I think that there's an ROI to that. If people are happier and they, you know, I think for a lot of us, when we're doing our work, we want to have those accomplishments and know that we've made an impact and that we're not bogged down by, the friction or just pieces of the role that aren't as exciting so people can focus and learn new and different things. I mean, I do also at the same time want to acknowledge that, there is a lot of concern about, replacing skill sets and shifting how people work. And that is a lot. And we've gone through this in human history many, many times. And I just want to have the empathy for that too, that among all that we're navigating in our world and lives, this is yet another potential change for people, a big one. And so then how do we work with people to, again, relate it back to, when you spoke with me, there's a part of what you're doing that just drains you every day, every week. But what if this tool could come in and help with that? And then, maybe you were able to focus more time if you're a marketer. Or Eric, I think about you with all the outreach that you do and being such great community leader. Focusing more on that is going to bring people to joy. But yes, at the end of the week on a Friday, or even thinking ahead to Monday again, right? That there could be more excitement.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a conversation I had with my wife probably 25 years ago, long before I got into the Salesforce ecosystem. I was in a role that I wasn't enjoying, and I came home practically every day complaining about my job. And at one point, she finally said to me, "Why don't you find a job that you enjoy?" And I don't know why that didn't come to me on my own, but perhaps the role I was in back then was too focused on just getting the job done and not on the human side of things. Thinking back to way back then and the things I was doing and the systems I was interacting with, I feel like that's probably what was really going on, was the organization was just simply transactional focused almost, rather than anything else. It's interesting, the weird little memories that this conversation is bringing back for me. So I appreciate that, Daniel. So thanks for that. Um, it is interesting. There's so many different aspects to life and to careers that are out there to impact what we do and how we do things, and probably in some degree even more so why we do things.
You're
Can't agree
reminding me
more.
too that one of my main missions is that, for people to, I think in life, like to leave people better off than we found them, and to, do something that makes their day brighter. And so, you know, in the back to sort of, joy within the workplace. And I completely understand there's so many varieties of jobs and levels and roles. And, sometimes some of the tasks we're asked to do aren't fun. And I understand that. There's lots of different industries. But again, I think there's always opportunity to learn from that. See if there's some way, maybe it isn't tech, it could be the data part, or it could be the process part, or it could be the people aspect of that role. What can we do to make it better?
Yeah, and I think we can all definitely think to a time where we were in a role that we didn't like, or an organization we didn't really want to be at. And, in Eric's case, it took a conversation with his wife to make that realization. But I think, in all reality, we probably could also think of a time where somebody helped us out. Somebody helped raise us, to our potential. And this is what I'd say to the audience. For those that are a little bit more experienced, that have the expertise, the relationships, pay it forward. The Trailblazer community depends on folks like that, especially the folks that are newer into the ecosystem, or trying to navigate role changes, or the various dynamics tied with these technology jobs. That's just my call to action. Just want to just mention that because it felt very relevant.
Well, to add to that, I completely agree. I mean, when I first got into the ecosystem, there's a lot of jargon, and I don't know, can I do this? And there's so much to learn. Someone very generously mentioned that there was the community and user groups, right? And that just was night and day. And so what I like to say to people now is, whether you're day zero on this journey, whatever that is for you, or you've been doing this a long time, first of all, you all matter. You all have a lot to offer. You bring your prior and life knowledge and experience forward. So don't feel like you have to wait to be a quote unquote expert to join the conversation, share what you're finding interesting. I mean, I see newer members of the community posting their learning journey. I find it fascinating. I'm revisiting, I'm learning it from a different point of view. And there are things I've forgotten or that I never had a chance yet to review. And at the same time, if you have been in it for a while, like you're saying, there is so much that you can offer, and I know, temper that with, your own self-care and the time that you're able to commit. But just showing up and sharing what you know, especially considering how fiercely technology changes the platforms we're using, data and the AI, it is the pathway forward, because not any one person can know it all. And that's the other thing, is I just love that there isn't the ego about it. Just share. And you could be making, as you all on the call, I know, do these ripples that you probably can't even imagine is making someone else's career.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Daniel, I have to ask, I know Eric mentioned it and mentioned briefly kind of what you do in the intro, but what are you up to these days? I'd love to learn a little more about what what's happening in the business side, what type of work you do, just in case anybody in our audience is looking for some expertise.
Best way to answer that is what I want to be doing with DHG Holistic Solutions. I picked the DHG for those three pillars for a reason. The data, my mission there is more actionable insights. We collect a lot of data. How do we visualize it? How do we get it back in the hands of the people who are putting it in so they can make decisions and find those aha moments and understand, the people in mission that they're serving. Human side is all about the empathy, the change management, governance, training, that voice and perspective that people have so we can make sure what we're delivering is joyful for them. And then the goals, it's about the strategy and the roadmap and thinking, more holistically about what is we're trying to achieve. And all three just blend so well together. It's part of those business, technical, and human fundamentals. And so I wanted to do this because I think sometimes we can rush to implement or to change. And I understand it. There's a lot of pressure of time, resources, but these pillars ground us in why we're doing it. What outcomes do we expect? And so I enjoy working with clients to figure out for them where they at in that journey and what are those easy wins and longer term pieces that I can help with, being an advisor and an architect to move them along their path so that ultimately, again, people are happier with the outcomes of what that beautiful intersection of people, tech, and data can do for their missions.
Absolutely, and that resonates a lot with me. Just given my role in the Salesforce ecosystem has been I put a big role in like a pre-sales capacity, working with prospects and customers to understand the value. What are you trying to accomplish, achieve? Because the technology alone isn't going to deliver it, and oftentimes having to explain or articulate the reason why we want to do that. That strategy component, right? Trying to understand the why, especially now with AI, right? What now all these organizations are wanting Agentforce, they're wanting other AI solutions, and there's just too many organizations that are feeling the concept of FOMO. Like they don't want to be left behind. They're not fully sure what use cases they want to achieve, and they want a POC in 12 weeks, right, or 10 weeks, and that's a bit of a recipe for disaster, right? Just hearing you say that, I definitely can resonate with that for sure.
Sorry, that brings up one interesting question that I have that I feel like you've already answered, but I want to ask the question just outright and see how you answer it. How do you measure success in the things that you do?
I like to ground all of my work back to the outcomes. I mean, it's not time. Don't measure me or us on time. What, is it, something is taking several minutes? Is it that people just aren't using it and they don't like it at all? And so then we want to put, a time and an outcome on that, that's realistic, using the SMART goals, framework, for example. It can be hard, I understand, to measure things like empathy and why spend this, a little bit of that extra time and resources on those pillars and upfront. It's because we've seen how organizations will likely spend more than that on the other side of it. And so if we can get ahead of that and identify a few areas, right, and set those goals for what we expect this to look like, then as we go through the process, build and test and deploy it, we should be able to measure it because we've set up the goals in such a way. And it's not, to me, by the way, logins, for example, or how many people are served. I mean, you could serve people for 4 seconds. And maybe that is the business model and that's great. But there's a quality element there maybe. And so I don't like to use numbers just for numbers' sake. It really does get back into relating that to something that's going to be valuable to the people. And I understand that can be hard to sometimes measure. It is challenging.
Yeah, and especially now, and I'm going to go a little bit off track here. In the pre-sales world and trying to drive value to clients, getting asked, well, how are you and your organization leveraging AI to, deliver more for less and quicker, right? I mean, we all know the triangle, right? There's price, there's quality, and there's time. And typically you can only get two of them. But, there is now a paradigm shift, and potentially you could get all three together. But what does that actually look like? Organizations that are primed for that will likely have hopefully good outcomes with this emergence of AI. And as you kind of mentioned, Daniel, regarding these outcomes, I mean, we're hearing the term outcome-based pricing. Right? Instead of measuring, measuring the work by the hour, you're measuring it by the outcomes that you're driving towards. So that's kind of an interesting shift. I mean, I think there's a lot of unknowns there around how you measure those types of outcomes when there's a lot of variables that are unknown. But I think the direction that you've proposed definitely will get people thinking about how do I start thinking from what value I bring to the customer? Am I just a cost, or am I a value?
I love that. I mean, that comes up a lot. And I know, there's a place too for, an hourly type of format. But I do believe, again, that, if we focus on, okay, you've got various needs. Okay, let's pick one, whatever's the highest, priority for you. And then we think through, those pillars, right? Of, well, what would this look like? And what is that going to drive? I mean, you're having better retention of your customers, or when they're the case resolutions, not just that we solved it faster, it's that actually the feedback we're getting. Because, we can open a case, and respond right away with a generic. That doesn't mean we met the needs of the customer in that example. But again, relating it back to, what is it, that we're trying to improve here. And I think the other piece is, especially with something like AI or just in general, start smaller. And I do understand like that drive to go big and follow it all at once, but I think it's just can be too much at times. And so I think, relating it back to some of those easier wins first, I've seen that build the momentum. Because then as you're trying to get up Mount Everest, you can actually look back and see, wow, look at what we've accomplished. We can look around and see, where we've been. And then, yeah, okay, there's the next climb to keep going. I think it's less overwhelming.
Absolutely. All right. So as I kind of try to bring this all back together for our audience, as you all probably heard, there's a lot more that goes into managing technology, whether it's Salesforce or otherwise, or implementation or managed services. But at the end of the day, driving empathy through architecture, driving decision-making through the why behind things, as opposed to just, performing whatever automation or technical task that's at hand, driving human in the loop and understanding what the end user's goals and objectives are, reaching a equilibrium with that is key to drive success with any technology rollout. Daniel, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I learned definitely a couple things from you in this short time, and I hope our audience as well. As we wrap up, I'd love to, maybe ask you to give the audience just what is one thing that you maybe recommend that, somebody begin to do, maybe even if it's a micro task or micro activity, to really help improve or adjust maybe their way of thinking, or maybe it's just, be curious or learn more. Just, I would love to hear from you. Like, what is that one thing that, you feel like you want people to maybe start thinking about that will help them individually, and then help them within the organizations at large, potentially?
And there's two parts that work together here. First, you said it yourself, the micro steps, in the world of infinite possibilities, it can sometimes hold us back because it's, where do I go? And, a lot of thinking can go into it. And so just, great mentors always remind me, just take a micro step to move. And, when you're moving that momentum, you can then pivot and change directions very easily. And then back to grounding and empathy, it really can be as simple as get to know your end customers, within your organization, and then that they're serving. Because when you get to hear their experiences and what they're going through and what ideas they have, it can spark things that just had never been imagined otherwise, because they're in it. And there's a place too for, leaders and strategy. It's everyone working together. But again, back to spending a few moments, even, right? Sitting at someone's desk, or you're maybe on a call center, and how they say sometimes someone's listening in. or, focus groups. I love sitting in on that, right? Where I'm in the room and I'm just there to listen, and, you don't take it personally, anything about the technology. You're there to understand their experience, or some of those ways that you can make a difference.
Love that. Perfect. Well, this brings us sadly to the end of the episode. I feel like we could have kept going for another 30 minutes or more, but I'd really, want to thank you so much, Daniel, for joining us today and just your thoughtful insights and perspective, bringing people, process, data, technology. I think I said that correctly, maybe not, but this is really the kind of conversation that, we want to have here at Beyond the Org, because it's in the name, right? The technology is one pillar of a multifaceted structure, and all of them together have to be resilient for the mutual success. So thanks everybody for joining us today and tuning in to the podcast and supporting the show. If you've enjoyed the episode, be sure to follow us and leave us a review, or if there's anything specific you'd like for us to discuss, definitely reach out to us directly, and we'll be seeing you next time. Thanks
To everyone.
Perfect.